we will call the meeting to order at 7:03. The meeting is happening both in person and on Zoom. Because we have members on Zoom, all votes will need to be by roll call, just to be consistent with the open meeting law. And in terms of attendance, we have all 6 members of the committee currently in attendance. So it'll be Joe, Kevin, Eric, myself, and Catherine. Catherine's also online. Catherine's online. And the meeting itself is being recorded in case anyone wants to have the fun of watching it later. For what it's worth, people do actually watch these meetings afterwards, these meetings along with others. So public engagement, if anyone wishes to talk at this point from a public engagement perspective, you're welcome to do so, otherwise we'll move on. Reviewing the minutes. So the minutes were circulated and made available for our last meeting from April 7th. And these are the only outstanding minutes. We're actually otherwise fully caught up on all of our minutes. This particular set of minutes was for the meeting that we had on Zoom, as the town hall was unfortunately locked and we had to make a dynamic change in place. We actually put a sign on the door for consistency with open meeting line, as people did see when they went to town hall and realized they couldn't get in either. So that way they would know where to go to the meeting. So the good news is the requirements work the way that they're designed to, so that people can participate, they can join meetings. And otherwise the meeting itself, I thought, was very productive. In short, as noted on the minutes themselves, there were four bylaws that were actually all voted in, general bylaws. They're all voted to be moved to the November town warrant, and those will be submitted as soon as the warrant itself is open. I've submitted those actually to the town council already for that purpose. And those were handled by votes. And then we had some other discussions and updates as well. Any comments on them? Do we have a motion to approve the minutes as presented? Kevin's made a motion to approve the minutes. Do we have a second? Eric is seconding the motion. Thank you very much. Okay, so now we've got a motion on the floor to approve the minutes, and with that discussion, any discussion about the minutes themselves? Welcome, Anne. And I think she's saying she's got 1 minute before she's able to fully join us. Any comments on the minutes themselves? No comments on those. Okay, seeing none, we will take a vote in roll call. So for the 4 members in the audience here, Eric?
Yes.
Yes. Joe?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Online, we've got Anne.
Yes.
And Catherine, if you're able.
Yes.
And I'm an affirmative, so the minutes are approved. I will go ahead and put a footer on them that they were approved today, send them a copy off to the town clerk, as well as the town administrator's office, so that they will then be available for posting as well. Thank you very much. Item number 4, town meeting recap. And Attorney Bobrowski, I'm not sure how much you've seen about what happened in Wakefield, but it was an interesting town meeting, lasted 2 sessions. A couple of quick things that relate directly to our work. There was a discussion on the FEMA floodplain. That was a zoning replacement section, and that passed with very little discussion. There's also an ADU bylaw. It was different than what was actually posted in the actual verbiage was different than what was posted in the warrant. I will get a copy of that now that the town meeting should have actually been, we've just passed the 10 days. So it should now be fully prepared and have been submitted to the Attorney General's office. The language there was very specific. What I've heard is that the language was actually among the best language that had been submitted for pre-approval to the Attorney General's office. And we will be waiting on formal approval of both of those. We'll send the language as we currently have it over to Attorney Bobrowski so that he can work in the current language and then make any changes as may be required as well. But the ADUs, there was a healthy discussion at town meeting on that, but it did approve by even though it only needed a 50% acceptance, it actually had a very large super majority. So a lot of great feedback on that. And I think there's some lessons for us as we approach the zoning recodification to go forward as well. So from a particular note, Attorney Bobrowski that got into the ADU bylaw was actually a prohibition on short-term rentals. So
it was actually what? I didn't hear that.
A prohibition on short-term rentals.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Not as a general use. So that's prohibited for ADUs and general use now. Previously, the town had decided not to take separate action on that item. It had come up before for regulation, and the town had decided not to take action this time. It was worded that as a prohibition, and it actually has been accepted by the town meeting. Of course, we'll see what the Attorney General's office ultimately says about that. But both of those were accepted. Any discussion on the zoning articles that were approved at town meeting? The other item that came up was parliamentary process for citizen petitions. The last article at the town meeting, and it relates kind of to the discussions we've had in this group around town meeting. There were some interesting parliamentary procedures, and the town moderator didn't really allow for the any of the procedures to take place. I'm not going to give any formal opinion as to whether, how he handled that, other than he, as moderator, he has the right to run the meeting. And in Massachusetts, that is extraordinarily hard to overrule. So his rulings on parliamentary procedure, whether they were consistent or not with the processes and procedures, were taken as they were. And I mention that because we may want to revisit how we want to handle parliamentary processes for citizen petitions. This is related to a citizen petition that came up for the third consecutive time for an anti-Israel boycott, divest, and sanction article that would ultimately hurt the residents of the town financially, in addition to not taking action to Israel directly. So it was a boycott, divest, and sanction type of article. I have no issue personally with it coming to town meeting. I think it's an appropriate forum for any citizen who can get 10 signatures to bring any article. It's a matter of, should the town meeting have its own ability to determine how much of a presentation, how much depth it wants to give to any article. That's something that I think is appropriate for us as a bylaw review committee, where we're a subset of the town meeting, to actually make recommendations, or to choose not to. I think either option here is something that we'll want to consider. So that article did go down after some discussion. It took about 25 minutes in total of the townspeople's time for the article itself. So that was something, and again, I do anticipate that will come up. There were some other issues with the town meeting that came up. You may have seen there were a couple of articles, including a zoning article, that was pulled from the town meeting. They were submitted by citizen petition and then not printed by the town council. That is actually being reviewed by state authorities, because it deprived the town meeting from the ability to vote on those particular articles one way or another. Regardless of the outcome, the town meeting did not get that to make that decision. So that's an item, and that again gets back to the parliamentary procedure. once something is submitted, is there the ability to not actually have it go forward, submitted and validated? So if you've got any thoughts on that, Attorney Bobrowski, they're certainly welcome on that, since it was zoning related. If there's the ability to withdraw a petition after it's been submitted and accepted by the executive branch.
I think anybody should be able to withdraw whenever they want.
And who would make that decision?
Well, are we talking about a citizen's petition that's gone through the public hearing process and now they want to withdraw it?
Yes.
I mean, it's 6 of one, half dozen of another. I mean, you could always send somebody up to the microphone and move to pass over indefinitely. And
I actually am in agreement with that type of strategy. It's just a matter of, do they have the ability to not print it at that point and not have any discussion of it?
That one actually never had a public hearing.
Public hearing actually happened because it was called. There wasn't a huge discussion on it, but it actually did happen.
We did.
Yeah.
Planning board didn't get a presentation for it.
They didn't do a presentation, but there was public
It
hearing
was
called.
on, okay.
So a public hearing
It was on the
happened,
agenda.
whether the presentation or not is irrelevant. So it becomes an interesting aspect. So for what, again, should the rights of the town meeting as the legislative branch when something's brought before, because it becomes a gaming of the system. And that's what's happening here. Because by not having it brought forward, does it actually deprive the town meeting of the ability to vote on it one way or another with the side effects of that vote as well?
did the article have the endorsement of the planning board? Favorable recommendation?
No,
Ah,
it had no endorsement, neither positive nor negative.
so I mean, if it has a favorable recommendation from the planning board, even if it's defeated, it can come back at the next town meeting.
Correct, but it had no favorable action.
And the more than 21 days elapsed from the close of the public hearing?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's why it becomes actually substantive. By not having it printed. It's something that the state is gonna have to figure out what the effect of that is going to be.
So you're telling me that essentially what happened is that they walked in, looked at the room and realized they had no chance, so they tried to withdraw it.
Correct. Well, most of the people, not all of them.
Yeah.
And so it becomes an interesting legal issue. And again, the state will have to figure out how it gets treated. Should it come back within 2 years? If it doesn't come back within 2 years, it's really a moot point. Because that would be the downstream effects of it, is that 2-year bar. So with that brings us to the main item for today, which is zoning recodification draft number 8. So as we start this discussion, I will state there's been some feedback already received by member Reed. So Eric has submitted some feedback directly to Attorney Bobrowski since it was published. And that was sent directly to you, Attorney Bobrowski, for future incorporation and feedback as well. It's mostly administrative types of Scrivener's notes and consistency of language. And I did hear from Attorney McGrail. He was not able to be here due to a scheduling conflict this evening, but he did contact me earlier today to make sure that we know, one, he's still interested, and two, he actually does have some, again, relatively minor updates, but things along language and other things. He wants to make sure that these are as good bylaws as they can possibly be. He's going to send those notes directly to Attorney Bobrowski once he's had those done, sometime realistically within the next week or so. Hopefully sooner rather than later. So with that,
Can't really.
comments as we get started.
I got a comment.
Yes.
Draft 7 had the report of the building inspector be made to various parts of town government. Draft 8 has this monthly report become a yearly report. The yearly report, there's summarizing various things, and it takes up about a page and a half. And then there's maybe a third of a page for the wire inspector and the gas inspector. It's presumably the building inspector never approves of a new building unless he's had the reports of the wire and the gas as necessary. I was wondering why the change went from monthly to yearly. Maybe the people in the government never read those reports anyway, so why make them? I don't know, but that's not really a nice reason. Does anyone know? You don't have to answer this question.
I don't have an answer. Does anyone else know how that works? I'm not sure if Ann, in your prior experience on the town council, if those reports were something that you were familiar with and used or not.
I'm satisfied.
Okay. So it's certainly a valid information. I think that a lot of that is up to the town administrators, how the data of various departments get submitted. Okay, Attorney Bobrowski, if you'd like to present.
Well, I think where we left off, Mr. Chairman, was at your request, I incorporated the suggestions of the ZBA, which we received back in, I believe, January. I incorporated the suggestions of Mr. Reed. I took the performance standards out at your request. I think that was the shopping list of things that I did, and then I returned this to you on, I think it's dated April 12th. So I've been, had 2 town meetings last night at about an hour and 10 minutes apart. But say that in both cases, the town meeting approved the recodified bylaw. So now I'm hoping that we'll have the same progress going forward here. My understanding of my work agenda going forward is, I mean, it was ADU, but you sound like you've already accomplished that. So it's just me putting it into the 9th draft. The same is true for the floodplain. I know we have unfinished business with regard to signs, and I believe that I've been provided an older version of a compromise on the signs, overlay district signs, general, which I think we should definitely use that as agenda for a meeting so that everybody's on board and I don't waste a lot of time trying to recodify 30 pages of sign bylaws. I don't know that everybody's had a look at it. It's definitely going to be a bear of a job. So I think we ought to look at that in the interim between now and the next meeting and schedule something relatively quickly so that I can start recodifying that as well. Other than that, I'm not aware of anything pretty much else that we left behind on the table when I went my way and you went yours back in late March, early April.
So,
I can speak to the sign.
Joe, would love to hear what your thoughts and how we have recommendations. Sign of the times, please. So
I'm really having trouble hearing. So say the last part of that again.
The ZBA is looking into the sign bylaw. We invited Jim McBain, who was an old member that's no longer with us because he moved out of the town. He wrote the sign bylaw, that whole package years ago. So right now the ZBA is getting everyone's comments together. It's already gone to maybe 1 or 2 meetings. I think we're going to talk about it next week's meeting, maybe we'll finish it up at that meeting. We might need one more. And then we're gonna send it off to the planning board to Kevin, and they're gonna post it up for public comment.
And what is the gentleman's name again?
Jim McBain is one of our members. He was on the sign committee. He wrote what you have, what we sent you via email, those 30 pages. He basically wrote that whole thing.
Okay,
So we are trying, the ZBA members are trying to go through it and maybe shorten it, or just getting everyone's comments and putting it together. I think it's gonna be long. It's 30-something pages. And I recommend maybe shortening it, but then it may not do it justice by shortening it. So
yeah, so he wrote this back in 2023?
I thought it was earlier than that, but he might, I don't know. I thought it was during COVID, but it might have been.
Yeah, I'm looking at something in my, well, the email's dated. What the hell is it? The completed copy of signed bylaw 8/23.
Could have been. Thought it was older than that, though. That would only been 2 years ago, but.
Yeah, attached is a signed bylaw committee several years ago, no action. So I guess if there's a committee at work on it, will they be reporting to the bylaw committee?
Eventually, right?
There are a couple, what we're getting to, I think is the necessary coordination that we're going to need as we go towards the fall as well, which is between the zoning board of appeals, the planning board, and bylaw review, to make sure that the language is consistent so that it can get into the recodification, but also meets the needs of the ZBA and the planning board, so that the endorsements there are authentic and genuine, so that we can present that, yes, as a change, but it's not a wholesale change. It really is recodification of the signage as well. And so hopefully to simplification to some degree as maybe appropriate, but it sounds like it's being determined by the zoning board of appeals, and then we'll also have input from the planning board. Is that a fair way of characterizing it?
Yes.
So what I think I'm hearing, Attorney Bobrowski, is that there is draft language. It's not quite yet in final form, but I think that as soon as we can get even the draft language over to Attorney Bobrowski, he can start to modify it if necessary, at least for recodification purposes, renumbering and so forth, so that he can get it into the next draft or the draft thereafter. So that way, instead of just having placeholders or having language that is intended to be irrelevant, we can actually have the correct language. Does that seem like the right approach?
Yeah, with one caveat. The sign overlay district certainly could use some massage, but there's also the sign generic section. And how are the two of them going to relate? That's the overall question. That's the biggest problem I had in trying to deal with it. Are we going to the standards of the overlay district town-wide? Are we keeping the overlay district standards limited to the overlay district? What are we doing in the rest of town? Those are the questions.
So based on what I've heard through the meetings we've had so far, and I'm just giving my opinion first, and definitely want to hear people's opinions on this. What I've heard so far is that the general sign bylaws serve one purpose. The sign overlay, which is more restrictive, serves a more distinct purpose, but because of its restrictions and covenants and requirements, would be inappropriate to impose town-wide for industrial areas and other areas that are not deemed primary general commercial and retail oriented in their nature. So what I've heard through this process is that there is a need to still retain the sign overlay district with additional separate requirements. And knowing that that is complicated is a polite way of putting it. Where an item comes up that I think has caused some of the conflict in understanding is, does the sign overlay requirements, do they replace for the sign overlay district, replace in their entirety the general signage requirements in the overlay district itself? So that way there's only one set of requirements that a property would need to adhere to. And I don't have the language that's being worked on, so I don't know the answer, but I know that has been a source of confusion of, do you have two sets that apply to a particular property? If you've got two different sets of rules, that's confusing enough, but if you've got two sets that have to apply, then how do you evaluate that and adjudicate it becomes really confusing. That's what I've heard as the primary issue, and from a language perspective, I would like to see it clarified so that in the overlay district, which may have more stringent requirements, I've heard that message that that's a bona fide need. That the language clarifies that only those requirements apply. I don't know how that language would need to be written to be correctly interpreted and enforceable. I leave that up to Attorney Bobrowski. So those are my 2 cents on it. Others who have input?
Dan, may I just add something? And Joe, I'd be curious to see that 2023 document, if you have it, or I can dig it up somewhere, but.
I can forward it to Dan right now.
Oh, okay, that'd be great, Mark.
Okay.
Part of me thinks, Dan, that we have a little work to do before we send it to Mark. And I think what Joe was saying, the two planning board and ZBA looking at it is so important. But historically, because I was on the board way back when this was a hot topic, there were 2 different sign committees that didn't talk the same language always. So I think that's how potentially we had some confusing language that seemed to not contradict each other. And both committees were filled with excellent people from the town, but with different agendas. And I almost think that we can have a singular agenda for a sign bylaw that incorporates the overlay district, which was basically downtown. And historically, folks wanted it to look like Melrose, not, we wanted it to look pretty. We wanted it to look uniform, not to have all different signs. That's really where a lot of the conversation came from. So I think there is a way to make it more cohesive, but I'm just wondering if the town groups should talk about that before we send it to Mark.
The thing I just sent has some thoughts by
Okay.
Mr. McBain
About that.
that he shared back
Okay.
in January. And, for example, he said in his email to Chip
Tarbell.
31 pages. I expect the next stage would be that someone professionally would wordsmith this and maybe streamline. If you read through this, you will see the design review board was giving more authority over the applicant, including bonus points for great signs, which got them larger unit. I came up with a formula that gave business more flexibility on sign sizes, applied to Hearts and to some level at 377 Main. So there's some background there in terms of agenda items.
That makes sense.
I think probably, well, I mean, I think that a town-wide sign bylaw with less stringent standards is appropriate, and a downtown sign overlay district, or even if it's just, sign regulations in the XYZ district,
Right.
an overlay district. That's the way I would structure it. I don't think you need to do a sign overlay district. I think, many towns have different standards for signs depending upon the district. You certainly have different standards in the residence district than you do in the general business district. And you probably have different standards in a highway business district too. So that can all be built into one
Yep.
section 6.2.
That makes a ton of sense.
Question is, I also think that if you're doing more stringent regulations in District XYZ, regulations, you're not, I think just for the benefit of the user, you wouldn't want them to have to cross-reference stuff in the more broad provisions of the sign section. So in other words, make it like a tear out. If I'm in this district, I can tear these 5 pages out, and this is what I have to do.
That sounds great.
I think that makes sense to have a general one and then a downtown one. The size of the overlay district surprised me where it's not just downtown, no. It stretches and there are
Greenwood.
pieces along Main Street. SIBO by itself is part of it. So it was kind of picking and choosing different areas, which
Correct.
I think the character of Greenwood Plaza or SIBO is very different than Main Street, Albion.
Mhm.
So it sounds like I'm waiting for the ZBA/planning board and Mr. McBain to finish their work and get something to me, and then I can start serving the role that someone professionally would wordsmith this and maybe streamline it. Sounds like my job.
That's kind of what the ZBA is doing right now, is wordsmithing it.
Okay.
But we have a meeting next Wednesday at the ZBA, and I'll bring this up about the Washington, maybe the overlay district, and that's kind of the consensus right now, I'm hearing.
So what I'm hearing is whether it's an overlay district or if it's a differently defined district, as long as there's clarity of it, so that a person knows these are the requirements that they have to follow. And
I'm jumping ahead to your sign overlay district, so just give me a second here. I'm looking in the.
As much as I would love to do just, general business districts and things along those lines, I think that because of the way the districts are and the maps are currently set up, it would probably cause this committee and this process a lot of angst if we tried to do anything that would change the implications of something this significant. And so, while I think that that's a goal that we would have, unless we were to eliminate the concept of an overlay completely and eliminate the concept of having a separate signage district entirely, if that was the recommendation we had, that's fine. Then we'd have a singular signage set of requirements, which I think would be great for simplification. But I'm not sure that that would necessarily meet the needs of the town at the present time. And so part of where I'm going with this is I think we're kind of locked into the concept of an overlay because that's what we currently have. And our role here really is recodification instead of doing something more substantive. I think that that would be too big of a project for this particular group to chew on. That's where I'm looking and saying, I'd love the idea of simplifying it. I think that may be something that the town council town council in conjunction with the planning board and zoning board of appeals, the three adjudicatory boards, could do after the recodification as a separate project. I would wholly endorse that type of move, but I don't think that that's really our role as part of recodification. Now, fortunately, should they choose to do that, we happen to know an attorney that's an excellent in the zoning language that will be intimately familiar with the zoning bylaws. That may be something that would be appropriate, but I think that trying to go out to do that now, I think would not be helpful for this particular process.
Just to keep this in perspective, that is the sign overlay district. So it's, just eyeballing it, I would be surprised if that's the entirety of one district.
If you know, there's also a segment towards the bottom of the map.
Mhm.
That Greenwood?
It's Greenwood, right?
Which is the Greenwood area.
Oh, I'm sorry, there's another area down here, okay.
Right, and that's what, it's not one district, it's actually a couple of districts, because those areas actually have different pieces.
Yeah, there's a little
Yeah,
easel
that's
stuff
Chiba.
down there, right? I think that's all there is.
So it's 4 different segments,
Okay, well, there's 4 there.
and it's weird.
Mhm.
I remember when we were having the initial discussions, even then it was acknowledged it was kind of weird. I don't know of a better word to describe it, but it serves a purpose, and I think it served the town really well so far in getting a better set of consistently, reasonably aesthetic signage and meaningful signage for these areas without having to impose the costs that are involved in doing that to the businesses that are not in the signage overlay district. So most of the areas that are between these particular 4 segments is actually a surprising amount of residential space. So there's a lot of residences and as well as some municipal uses along Main Street. You don't often see towns that still have residences along Main Street, but we actually have substantive amount of residences along Main Street, especially next to Crystal Lake and so forth. That's actually all it's just general residences in that area. So that's where there's also some doctor's offices and other types of businesses in those areas. But I think that if we try to change things too much, I think we'll end up going into a rat's nest. I think that taking the suggestions from the ZBA and planning board to incorporate kind of as is with whatever wordsmithing and numerical changes and consistency that Attorney Bobrowski you think is necessary, I think makes a lot of sense. But otherwise, I think it's going to be complicated. The piece that I would advocate would be within our purview is to make sure that only one set of rules applies to any individual property, because that's part of recodification for people to be able to understand what they need.
That makes sense, Dan. I think at some point down the road, town council taking a look at it, because it is talking to a new business actually today. Things got held up because of the sign bylaw. So, or a business that's changing, I should say. So I think keeping it like this way, I agree. This would be too much for us to do, diving into the overlay, but it's something down the line. We should probably look at what other towns do to have it more accessible to folks coming in.
Agreed, and Eric has a comment as well in the room.
I was going to remark that in my boyhood in the 1950s, there were individual mom and pop grocery stores within walking distance of various residential districts. So they're all scattered all around. This was before people had 2 cars, so that when the husband had the car away, you could still walk to the grocery store and get some food and milk or bread as necessary. So these businesses, these spots that did business are now residences, and you can see the change in the building itself if you think about it. It's irrelevant to this discussion, but that's. And then I saw the development of the businesses, on Greenwood on Main Street, because some of them weren't there when I was walking to Greenwood School.
Excellent. And what I'm taking from that is that the character of the types of businesses has definitely changed. And with that, we've also seen the technology that's used by businesses to advertise change. And that's what's prompted a lot of the need for signage overlay districts in the first place. Because I presume when you were very little, there wasn't a whole lot of neon. At that point, it came in a little bit later. Somewhere in the 60s and 70s is when neon seemed to become very popular. We started to get a lot of the interior backlit signs that are now deemed a bit garish.
I can show you a picture of the 1937 storefront to the railroad market opposite the depot, which father and grandfather before me ran.
And we're getting back to some of that style in the overlay district. So it's front lit signage, wooden bases, and things along those lines. So the comments I think are very appropriate. Thank you. Other comments? So it sounds like, Joe, there's some work that you're going to be doing with the ZBA, and we'll put you in the hot seat to try and get something delivered so we can get it over to Attorney Bobrowski as well as over to the planning board.
That's the point.
And they're good at planning, so this is all good. Kevin, if we can have you and work with your colleagues on the planning board as well to try and expedite the input process. Now, I'm not referring to just a public hearing process. That can happen certainly for signage. I recommend that. It's to expedite if there's going to be any changes or suggestions from the planning board's own initiative initially. So again, we can get those back to Attorney Bobrowski. And then as additional feedback comes in to any of the boards, we can give it to we can deliberate on it, give it to Attorney Bobrowski and make those changes as well. The goal that I'm hearing here is to get something that can be put into a close to acceptable format quickly. Even if it ends up being a lot of pages, Attorney Bobrowski will have the ability to then do whatever process for the numbering and so forth. Does that seem like a reasonable approach going forward?
Yeah, but hopefully I can get the stuff relatively quickly.
That is definitely the goal, and it sounds like might have something for you towards the end of next week, at least in draft form.
Okay.
Even in draft form, if there's components that change, if it can just be highlighted what those changes are, Attorney Bobrowski can then, he's quite adept. I'm fully confident at this point with cut, paste, copy, and the other pieces as well.
So you're saying if I get something to send it?
It would help if I had this draft in Word, since I'm gonna have to otherwise always blows it up, so.
Yeah, if you can get to them in Word format, even better.
Yeah,
Now you're getting picky.
What was that?
Now you're getting picky.
We're getting picky with reason. Has to do with time and so forth, but again, it's just a sign of the times.
Yeah.
Sorry, that pun, the dad jokes in the obliged to give at certain times. But I think that if we can get the input, even if there's multiple minor revisions that go to Attorney Bobrowski, I think that that's preferred so that he has a starting point to make. to make changes from going forward. And if there's questions about language, I would think that those would also be appropriate. Obviously, Attorney Mullen is fantastic for giving input, but we also have access to Attorney Bobrowski for this, and this would definitely be within scope. Okay, so I would encourage that if you want to invite Attorney Bobrowski to any of those meetings for that purpose, feel free, you can go ahead and do so. That's the, and Attorney Bobrowski, this is part of the reason for making sure that we have the ability to do the additional meetings and so forth in the contract. So
Yeah, I'll talk with you about that later, Mr. Chairman.
So we're definitely on the same page, whether he has availability or not, that's a separate matter.
So when do we think town meeting will be? If, I'm sure this is kind of early for that decision.
It's actually not, that's the next item on the agenda. Before we get to that, any other comments on draft 8?
Well, I thank Mr. Reed. I cleaned it up, and it's, you know, nice and shiny right now. So let's put the finishing touches on it.
Thank you.
The feedback we've been getting really has been helpful because, again, the goal is to have as good a set of zoning bylaws, knowing that the Board of Appeals, Planning Board, and Town Council are going to have to interpret these for probably a couple of generations before there will be an appetite to go through this process again. And a group of citizens that are willing to be as involved as we've been for the last several years to go through it again. It's not something that happens every day or every year, or in fact, actually in reality, even every decade. It's just not that common. So I know we're doing it. The good news, Attorney Bobrowski, it does not look like we're going to need 20 drafts. So we're not going to come close to your record. Okay, that brings us over to item 6, financial town meeting preparation. That would be at the November town meeting. The date has not yet been set. That's outside of our responsibility to set. That's something that the town council does. What I've heard is that it's probably going to start somewhere around November 6th or November 10th. November 6th is a Thursday, November 10th is a Monday. Could start as early as November 3rd.
Well, if I get a vote, I vote for the 10th because on the 6th, I'll be in New Orleans. But I'm back that weekend, so.
Okay, hey, I will relay that preference to the town council. We just had an election, so we have a new chair of the town council. By then we will have either a new town administrator or an interim town administrator. Our current town administrator is in the process of he's decided to retire and abandon us from a formal municipal governmental role. He will still continue to live in town and be a presence, but that change, this will be the first town meeting with the new town administrator or an interim town administrator, as the case may be. Just want to make that part, let you know that that's also going to happen. So it's going to be a very interesting town meeting, just with those changes, and there are some other staff changes that are happening as well. So one other piece to this is the person who's helping with planning, which was Samantha Elliott, has also departed the town. She left actually right after the town meeting to pursue other components. She's going into some historical preservation. She did some fantastic work, especially on making sure the ADU bylaw was as good as possible and met the needs of the town. So we're looking to have that position filled as well. So again, there may be some staffing changes between now and then. I don't think that those any of those changes will materially impact our direct work, but may have indirect impacts, so we may get some relatively last minute feedback on suggested changes or preferences. And I think we should consider anything that is relatively minor. And if it's more significant than that, defer it to a future group, or defer it to future town council possible action. That's my thinking as we go into this. And I'm open to feedback for it. The purpose of this, if we start with, say, a date of November 10th, we have to have things submitted to the warrant. Will then happen in August and early September.
Mhm.
And we'll need to have things voted on by this body before then. We'll want to have feedback on it during that 2-month process. The formal public hearings and so forth will need to happen, but we'll want to have additional feedback before that. So that puts us to the summer to actually get any administrative changes that we want to make on our own at this point through into the recodification. That's what I'm hearing. Others' thoughts on that?
I remember when the Charter Commission, I watched their meetings. They set up the meeting for the fall financial meeting and set it up for a Monday, and sometimes that Monday would occur before the federal or state election the day after that. And the thought was, why did they do that? Why didn't they do it on the first Thursday rather than the first Monday, so that you wouldn't overwork the voting personnel? The other thing is that I've made a suggestion that an article like this that comes up in the regular town meeting could be given a designation of a special town meeting just for that article alone, which would fix it for the date in which people would know when to come for the voting, rather than attending the whole process because you don't know which date the article you're interested in takes place. So there's a flexibility that you could use there. I'm trying to think of creative ways, what I deem creative ways to use town meeting and the various things that can be done, and this is one of them. Thank you.
So what I'm hearing from that is to try and make a date certain for this issue.
Yeah, you might say, well, November 17th. So that you know you have plenty of time to take care of the other articles and then just hit the meeting on this, the zoning articles. I don't know if that's practical or not, but I made this suggestion.
So Attorney Bobrowski, the feedback, I'm not sure how well you were able to hear it and read it. The idea of having a special town meeting just for the recodification, just so that there's a designation of a date and time for the recodification vote. Because it is possible to have a special town meeting during a regular town meeting. There's no prohibition on that. Is that something that you've seen other towns do?
Sure, yeah.
So it's something we could certainly propose to the town council to do for the simplicity of the voting public to know when this particular article is coming up.
Yeah, like I have an article for a local business here in Concord. It's a pretty important project, and the moderator has reserved Wednesday, June 4th at 6:45 for the article. A lot of old people in CCRC want to come to vote, for their comfort and the ease of them driving. I'm sure some of them are not familiar with driving anymore to town hall. They've scheduled it at a fixed hour, so that works really well.
So we could certainly make that request of the town council to have a special town meeting. I don't think on our own accord we necessarily want to try and get the signatures or anything along those lines. So the other options that we would have is to make the request that this be held, that this be discussed early in town meeting. The first article is by the charter is a financial update on the town, but there's nothing that prescribes what has to happen after that. So we could put the request in that this happen immediately after the financial presentation. So if in lieu of having a special town meeting. So thoughts, numbers, we've all been to town meetings.
Kind of like that idea, just have it just for this one recodification. This way people aren't saying, I would go to the town meeting, but I'm gonna have to sit through 2 hours of the other, you know, money issues or whatever. Some people just don't want to go to that. They may not, they may skip this.
You know, it's funny because it cuts a lot. It cuts both ways.
Right.
In my race last night to get from Norton to Holden, I finally got to Holden at about 9:05. And I was Article 36, they were on Article 33. I had not yet been permitted to speak as a non-resident, non-voter. And the planner approached the moderator when it was our turn and said, Mr. Bobrowski needs permission to speak. And the moderator said, how much time does he need? And the planner said, probably about 5 minutes. There was an audible groan from the audience. And somebody said, call the question. And that was it. I was out of there. It all passed in 1 minute. So it cuts both ways.
I think either one works, but either doing a special one or seeing if we can appear right after financial update.
I think if you have two, there's a cost to it. By details you have to off, overtime details, things like that. That's just something to think about, especially when we're going into it, you know, it probably a tricky budgetary season. So I think Bob's right. It cuts both ways. You might have people annoyed they have to go to both, the ones that are really involved. So I almost lean towards trying to ask to have our what we're doing heard early.
That's a good point. And given the temperature of this last town meeting, there could be people upset that we would ask for a second special one with the expenses involved. But
Yeah.
From a procedural perspective, should the town council either ignore the request or forget about the request, both of which are realistic, given that, again, there's going to be staffing changes that we know and anticipate they'll happen. We could always make a procedural motion to have the item taken out of order. It does require a 2/3 vote, but there's no cost for that. It also becomes a really fast way to take the temperature of the discussion as well. And that's something that the town meeting is pretty used to doing. They usually grant it if there's a special reason, but not always. So others have thoughts on that? Otherwise, what I'm hearing, and I can take this responsibility on it as current chair, is to contact the town council to express the issue to them and ask them how they would like to proceed, how they recommend proceeding for that. So that way they're aware early in the process that this is not just a significant issue, but this significant issue that has costs and complications that other issues won't. So for what it's worth, it's actually one of the prescribed purposes, a very specific prescribed purpose in the charter, is for the financial town meeting to have to deal with the financial update and to deal with zoning bylaws. So this is actually very specifically included in the purpose. The annual town meeting is for budgeting and primary issues. This is to deal predominantly with financial update and zoning bylaws. That's the explicit intent. So I think that the request can be made. I think that to also present to them the idea that Eric has, if they wish to create a special town, call it as a special town meeting, on the town council's own accord, I think that we would have no objection, is what I'm hearing, to that, so that it then becomes a date, time certain within the context of the regular town meeting. So if regular town meeting starts at, say, 7 o'clock, they could have a special town meeting called for 8 o'clock. In which case, whatever discussion is going on at 7 o'clock would get suspended. The special town meeting would then open, have the meeting held, then you resume the special town meeting afterwards. And that would be up to, again, the moderators as to how they would want to handle that particular transition, but that could be done with effectively minimal cost. So it's not a designated, it's not a completely separate component, right? I think it's a great idea. My suggestion with the consent of the committee is to bring it to the town council so that they get the ownership of how they want that process to be handled by the town meeting. So
It's their decision.
politically, and knowing that this is recorded, I think that it has the advantage. It also encourages the town council to be supportive of the recodification up front. Obviously, their feedback is going to be sought and solicited as well, but I think this becomes a way that they are getting buy-in on the process early as a body itself. So any objections, any thoughts on that? Okay, seeing none, we'll go with that. Attorney Bobrowski, does that seem to be an appropriate way forward with regards to how this will be handled? And I will put in the preference for November 10th.
That's great, thank you.
So that would be for the zoning recodification, which is separate from the general bylaw articles that would probably be heard after other financial articles and so forth as well. That way, because the general bylaw articles only require a simple majority. Those are the things we heard before. And I don't anticipate that those are going to generate a whole lot of discussion at town meeting, whereas this particular article very well could have substantive discussion and lots of questions for Attorney Bobrowski, given if the last town meeting was any indication. So along those lines, public presentations and public hearings. These are a little bit different, which is why they're listed separately on the agenda. A public presentation is a meeting like this that anyone from the public can come to attend. It's up to the public body and the chair as to how the hearing, how that public presentation is then done with interaction. We tend to be a very open board, and I think we will want it to have presentations as soon as we get, probably starting with the next draft. Even if the signage piece isn't fully finalized, I'd encourage us to have some presentations so that people can start to hear what is happening with this, and there can be opportunities for people to learn about the recodification. And the members of the adjudicatory bodies would be encouraged to attend those meetings as well. And that would all happen before the public hearings, which are mandated before it can actually be heard by the town meeting. So public hearing, we actually have some special bylaws and how those have to be handled, and some special processes. People get a minimum of 5 minutes if they want to on it. It happens with the planning board being in control. So, and again, I expect that we will have members at that public hearing. And if there's additional public hearings, that's okay too. So thoughts on when those should be scheduled, how often we should schedule those and potentially even venue recommendations for them. I would just discourage us from trying to do things that say the new high school under construction or the old high school vaults being ready for its final year at this point. So I would encourage us to avoid the Farm Street Hemlock area. If you haven't been there recently, there's a lot of construction going on. But thoughts? Again, this is part of the process to help educate the town as to what's going on here. Part of our audience may actually be the local newspaper, people who are involved in various online media to, again, get the word out there. Thoughts? Suggestions?
Planning board did them with the ADU bylaw, and I think it was really helpful and made for a smoother process then.
How many meetings and hearings were held on that?
I think we did 2 public hearings.
Okay.
Given the size of this recodification, I think probably want to do several, start as soon as we can so that general public starts to hear more about it.
I tend to agree with Kevin on that. Others thoughts and input? And when we should potentially schedule them for over the summer as well. So one thought that comes to mind, and again, open to lots of ideas and soliciting your feedback, is to request that this be on an agenda for the town council for their summer meeting. They usually have one meeting over the summer. And if we can request that, again, it's a way to at least get interest and then keep the presentation to be very short, similar to the presentation we gave in concept in January at that update. I think there will be a short presentation of town council, but to also invite people to, again, give feedback to whatever other meetings we know we have scheduled at that time. Perhaps we do these at times that are jointly scheduled with other meetings that are occurring, such as with the planning board, possibly with the ZBA. That way we can get that hearing, we can get the feedback process done, and the adjudicatory boards can also get that feedback. Thoughts?
I think going before town council makes a lot of sense to introduce the idea. And also to explain we're not looking necessarily for de novo hearings on what we've done, because a lot of what we've done, some of it's governed by state law. So this isn't like, we're not going to redo the ADU, you know, so I think being really careful and clear about how we introduce it will make it easier for us to focus on the things that we can accept public comment on, that's substantive.
Thank you, Ann. That's helpful. Others' thoughts? Kevin, do you think the planning board would be open to another, effectively a joint meeting before the public hearing?
I think so. We're talking about our summer schedule at our next meeting, but summer seems relatively light right now, so it'd be a good time to do it.
Okay. And if we don't even have a quorum of this board available, I think that just having representation from this board will be helpful, so that, again, the idea is that we're showing collaboration and encouraging members of the public to attend those meetings as well. Because my experience is that all of the boards that we're involving actually appreciate getting feedback from the public.
Mm-hmm.
Even when sometimes they don't agree with the feedback, they appreciate getting. Joe, same question.
Set something up with the ZBA, although we only meet once in June, July, and August, so, maybe we can ask for a special meeting.
That, if that's something that you can discuss with the ZBA is, because unlike the last time where we went through lots of components in depth, this is, while we certainly can, I anticipate the goal of this really is to get feedback from the public in a joint method, in a joint manner. So it'll be a short, very short presentation. I would anticipate between Attorney Bobrowski and I, we would probably keep the presentation to less than 10 minutes. To try and keep it short, maybe even less than 5 minutes. But we won't call the question before that happens. Sorry, Attorney Bobrowski, we can't cut you off entirely. But I think the idea, if we can keep it to a very short presentation for people who happen to be particularly interested in the ZBA meetings, it'll let them become informed. The more informed the people feel that they can be, I think the better off it will be as it approaches town meeting. I think if we can be a part of it, I think it really is up to the ZBA and the planning board as to whether we're a part of a regular meeting or not. And depending upon when those meetings are scheduled, we'll coordinate with Attorney Bobrowski if he's available. Hopefully he will be. And again, if you want to participate remotely, Attorney Bobrowski, that should be fine for those meetings tend to be remotely dominated. And I don't think that those meetings are going to be dominated by this topic. This will be one piece of those meetings. We'll just ask for to have a relatively, a reasonable expectation for a starting time so that the members of this body and Attorney Bobrowski know when effectively to show up if they're not interested in the other topics that are occurring. That seemed to be a reasonable approach. Yeah. And then as we go, that should have, we do those 3 summer meetings. I anticipate we will also want to have a meeting sometime probably in August, which we'll want to schedule ideally today to hopefully in late August to hopefully do our final approval of the recodification submission of the article itself. There can still be changes to the recodification. So not reprinting the article for recodification won't be printed in its entirety of all bylaws, but the article for recodification, I think we will want to have ready for submission if the town warrant isn't open at that point for it to be upon it, the opening of it as well. So I think that if we have that ready and we're confident we can do that in late August, I think that's in our best interest. Otherwise, it can be done in early September. But the sooner it's able to be presented, so as soon as the warrant opens, it can be referred to the planning board and they can start the public hearing process. Because if the planning board wants to have multiple public hearings, we want to give planning board the ability to do that. That's where I'm just trying to back into what our summer activities are looking like. Eric.
The word presentation has something to do with a pet peeve I had. You look at the town meeting bulletin, and for the ordinary articles, you have the article on one side and another side space to write on. But when you do that for wording articles like this, you have a whole space here and the printing is compressed. If we had arguments over the wording here and people ask questions, you'd have a problem finding where it was because this side is allergic to paragraphs, if I may say so. And so you have something like this and it's hard to do. If you want to have space to write comments on it, you use the top space for words and then you leave blank space below. And the next question is, how is this going to be printed out when you finally have something passed? You'd have to type it again or play with the word processor. to do it, so we should think about how much work is gonna be done for these 132 pages for presenting to the public at town meeting, for the warrant before the meeting, and printing for when the lawyers and the people who want change or want to do something, if a document to work with. I think someone should talk about this beforehand, and that comes out of the word presentation.
So
Thank you.
Eric's point, Attorney Bobrowski is going to result in a question to you. So in the current way that the town meeting booklet is prepared, the articles are printed in their exact form on one side, and then usually the motion is on the other side. And the question then becomes, for recodification, is it between the recodification and the entirety of the substance of the zoning, how does that typically get presented and prepared by towns for submission? I think I'm asking that question right. If I
Yeah.
a way of asking.
In my town, they printed on a Herald-sized newspaper page, and it comes in the mail. Because it's, it's 100 and, let me look at the end, it's a big document. It's 134 pages right now. So small font, newspaper, bulk mail.
I missed the point. I have booklets of these, I kept all mine from 57.
So it won't be printed in a booklet like that.
Won't be printed.
It
Separate booklet.
It is, what I'm hearing from Attorney Bobrowski is that if a copy of the bylaws is mailed to every resident, it would be mailed as probably not even as a book, but as some sort of newspaper-like piece. What I'm hearing, what I'm taking from that is that that's largely a process requirement of some sort. And in lieu of doing that, if people want to actually really get something sensible, it will probably be made available both in paper form, in a printed way, and certainly online as well, in print, so that people can get the information in a way that's reasonably consumable.
Yes, rather than this,
It won't be in the booklet itself.
and it won't be all run into, it'll have normal paragraphs, like we found in.
I don't know so much about that.
This is what I get from Concord.
Yeah, I see the white space.
Yeah, it says Commonwealth of Massachusetts. It's the warrant. All the articles are printed in their totality. This is not a recodification, but this took 8 pages. I would imagine, given the font size, you're going to get a little bit thicker thing in the mail, but this is what they send around. It just comes in the mail on bulk mail.
So in Wakefield, typically they publish it in the local newspaper. That's what our requirement is that it get published at least twice. And it's usually a couple of pages. But for recodification, how is the recodification details typically made available to citizens? Because obviously sometimes 130 to 160 pages of text. We don't want to just necessarily mail a booklet out to every household or every resident. That would have it would have a significant cost, and it would be something that the residents wouldn't necessarily understand by itself.
Yeah.
So the question is, how do towns typically handle it? Do they make the booklets available at town clerks, or the select offices as they're called in most towns, for someone who wants a printed version, then make it available online? Is that considered to be a reasonable approach? Because obviously it's a lot of pages and details we want to make it available to anyone who wants it, but we don't want to incur the process of just sending something of substance. Because I anticipate that the actual recodification article itself isn't going to be hugely wordy.
Well, handing it out on the table as the voters walk in is not an effective way to do it because, even if you send it in the mail a month or so in advance, some low percentage of people is actually going to read it. And if you hand it out on the table as they're walking in, 0% of the people are actually going to read it. So that kind of approach has been disfavored. You can also, you can put in the warrant that the article is available online at the planning board's address and and copies are available in town hall at regular business hours, and then you sort of limit your exposure to the number of people who are going to actually want to come pick one up.
So it sounds like a lot of that is going to be determined by the town administrator's office.
Yeah.
As in town, between town administrator's office and town clerk's office as to how they want to make that information available. But it's not going to be printed in its entirety. Bylaws are not going to be printed in the town meeting booklet.
Well, I just wanted to raise a question well in advance, rather than doing a last minute decision.
Absolutely.
Realizing you should have made a decision earlier.
And I will add that to the discussion that I'll have with the town council to make sure that they allocate sufficient time and resources for the printing of booklets for those who want a copy of the booklets themselves. Because to Attorney Bobrowski's point, I don't think it makes sense just to have, hundreds of copies of a booklet available as people walk in.
Yeah.
100 and some odd pages. That's not necessarily appropriate, but we do want to make sure that if someone wants it, it's available on demand quickly at some office in town hall and or other locations. So it's reasonably convenient for anyone who wants a printed copy as well.
Yeah.
And it will certainly be available online as well.
Like when I was at the Holden meeting last night, of course, I didn't get there till 9:05, but I asked the folks sitting at the table whether there was an extra copy of their warrant available, and they said, no, we ran out. But I think this newspaper approach is probably the cheapest print option. And if you print some extras, then you can have those available for the stragglers.
And typically there's a full booklet available for anyone who comes in. There's usually not a shortage of booklets. The predictions are pretty good for the booklets themselves. And again, the booklet here, I don't anticipate is going to have the full recodification. It may have the printing of the other bylaws because those are short, relatively speaking. But for the recodification, I anticipate between Attorney Bobrowski and Attorney Mullen, they'll come up with wording that's probably pretty short that refers to the recodified booklet available somewhere else. They'll work on the language that we will ultimately vote on, hopefully in late August.
Well, here's a typical Warren article. Let me just take it out here. Hang on. But what I generally do is I take the chapter or section headings of your existing bylaw and then put two columns side by side and the new section headings as well. Here we go. I think this is it. Yeah. So I'll send this to you. But this is, let me just share page here. So this would be your old bylaw to see if the town will vote to delete all of this stuff. And this is the main section headings in the existing bylaw. And then replace it or substitute the chapter headings that I've consistently used, and these are the ones that would apply to you as well. And then additional information about, copies of the full bylaw can be picked up at the office of the planning board or wherever. So this is a deal I worked out with the AG's office, 20 years ago, and they always let this go through.
Does that answer the question that you had, Eric?
Yeah, if that'll do, I suppose someone wants to edit a sentence or two in the new proposal. It's become what we did earlier on the bylaw changes, is we accepted it without comment, without attempt to modify it. And so it's seeming like the attempt to modify should take place much earlier, but not at town meeting itself. I had the example of, with the charter, you have to send the change, if you vote for changes to the charter, you have to mail it out to everyone and they vote on it. And so that would be a big expense if you had a secondary set of changes over and above the changes of the charter review committee. And so when I submitted changes, they suggested strongly to me that I vote indefinite postponement. And so I did. I saved money for the town. And I hope to do the changes in the next decade. I hope I live that long. Thank you.
Thank you. Others thoughts on that? So with that, just going to reorganize things real quick. For the dates, next meetings. So the normal schedule that we've been following now for a few years would have our next meeting on June 2nd, followed by June 16th. And again, try and follow the hybrid format as we're continuing to get used to that having success. Do those dates work?
Yeah.
Okay, so if we don't have any substantive feedback before the June 2nd meeting, since that's 2 weeks away, then I may make the recommendation that we postpone, that we cancel that meeting and just do the June 16th meeting. But if we're able to get the feedback from the ZBA in particular, not that there's any pressure, Joe, but there's pressure, Joe, if we can get those changes put in advance of June 2nd, then, and any other feedback that we may get from any members or other members of the public, then hopefully we'll be able to go forward on June 2nd with a meeting. I anticipate the primary topic there will be any suggested changes, discussion of the signage bylaw that may be occurring, any other feedback
That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen in terms of the schedule right now. I mean, I don't have anything to work with, and nobody seems to know when they're meeting, and I have a full plate. I've got town meetings coming up, and I've got a pile of things I have to do for the Housing Appeals Committee. So I think it's much more realistic that I would have something back to you for the 16th, not the 2nd.
Okay.
Today's the 20th.
So with that, I'm hearing we will defer from the June 2nd to the June 16th meeting. if there's anything from the other adjudicatory bodies, then, you know, we could potentially reinstate it if there's a reason to.
Yeah, and as I said, I just sent to Brian too, and I said, look, if you've got any comments on the 8th draft, then get them to me. We got a little downtime, so I copied you.
Yep. Okay, so plan for one meeting in June, for June 16th. And then it sounds like there will probably be two additional meetings, or actually 3 additional meetings. There'll be joint meetings, one with each of the town council, zoning board of appeals, and planning board between June and August. And that will be really at the discretion of those bodies as to when those meetings are. My recommendation is that whoever can attend will attend those meetings. And we'll figure out those pieces for it. If we have a choice of those, I would prefer to make sure that we can coordinate for the town council meeting with Attorney Bobrowski, just so that if there's any questions by the town councilors, they can ask them with Attorney Bobrowski there. Whereas most of them are also attorneys, it's much better for everyone to have an attorney answer those questions. And I don't want to put Ann on the spot there for an area outside of your direct expertise, nor put Attorney Mullen in the spot where he would have to potentially answer a question without the in-depth knowledge of the details of the current zoning bylaws. I anticipate he will have a lot of in-depth knowledge by the time we get to town meeting, because at that point he will have the opportunity to read whatever is going forward as well. That would leave us with a meeting for tentative approval of the final warrant article towards the end of August. And that would be a warrant article likely very similar to what Attorney Bobrowski was just showing.
I would just alert you, Mr. Chairman, that I'm, as I usually do, in Rangeley, Maine, on Mooselook-McGuntick Lake, starting on Monday, the 25th. And I don't have cell coverage at the cabin. I have to drive into Oquassic and sit in the parking lot at the restaurant. So if you could do that meeting in any time the week of the 18th, that would be great. I'll be around.
So what I'm hearing for that is that we have two viable options. Either we hold the meeting at Attorney Bobrowski's cabin on the 25th.
We're not
Isolated.
It's a 1-bedroom. You're out of luck because we have 3 kids, so we can't have this. You know, I'm sorry, children. It's a 1-bedroom. You're welcome to sleep in the car and come in for breakfast, but.
So, or August 18th.
The week of any day is fine. But I from last year, I know that I'm about 4 miles away from wireless coverage.
And hopefully there will be no incidents that would necessitate someone to come out and get you while you're during your downtime. So week of the August 18th, preferences, thoughts? I'm thinking the 18th itself, that Monday, which would be the third Monday, consistent.
That works for me.
That works for me.
Okay, August 18th, 7 p.m. I will plan for. Hopefully at that point we will have already had the meetings with planning board, zoning board of appeals, and town council, so that we can then go forward. We will still, because of the nature of the article, of the actual article for recodification, there isn't a dependency on any specific changes, because the changes will be in the final booklet. They'll be printed presumably by the public hearing for the planning board or shortly thereafter, is my understanding. There may be even be versions before and after. It's what will be presented presented at town meeting that really matters.
Thank you for accommodating. I don't think you'll be surprised when I tell you that I'm determined to retire right now. So I've had a wonderful year. My daughter got married. I'm glad I stuck around to pay that bill without draining the retirement account, but I'm done. So,
You're not allowed to retire yet.
well, that's why I'm giving you my schedule.
Which we greatly appreciate all the work that you're doing with that.
Thank you.
Okay, anything else on scheduling front? Otherwise, we have one administrative piece that we are required to do by our town bylaws, and that's to undergo a reorganization vote. We have to have a vote for chair and vice. We also have to have a vice chair. Well, it's not a requirement, it's highly recommended, but a vote for chair is required since it's the first meeting after the town election. So with that, do we have any motions for chair?
I will let you take care of the housekeeping business, and I'll talk to you soon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Good, thank you very much.
Okay.
I move Dan Lieber as chair.
I second.
Okay, so we've got Ann making the motion, Catherine jumping off of mute to before I can say anything or even potentially object.
No.
And Joe, I know you were intending to say something. Was that a nomination that you were making for Joe Pride to be chair?
Yeah, but Ann beat me to it for you.
Move nominations be closed for this office.
Okay, so any other motions that I should be aware of for chair? Okay. So the motion is for myself to be elected chair for yet another term. This will hopefully be the final term on this particular committee. And then I'm anticipating that the committee will dissolve. We'll talk about that at a later time as to what that process actually looks like. It's not hard. It's at town meeting when we hand a final report to the town administrator. We hand it, we can then theoretically run because we're done. But upon handing him the final report, that'll happen realistically after all the votes. But at that point, our service will be complete. But we've got a vote before us. So all in favor, we'll do vote by roll call, first starting with those online. Ann.
Yes.
Catherine.
Yes.
Eric.
Yes.
Joe.
Yes.
Kevin.
Yes.
I'm going to abstain from that one because I can't. Thank you for your confidence. And I'm sorry that you have to put up with me for the remainder of our terms on this. So with that, we also have the opportunity for a vice chair, which is highly recommended. And do we have a motion for a vice chair?
Motion for Ann?
Okay, Joe's making a motion for Ann to be vice chair. Do we have a second?
Second that.
Catherine is seconding that. So Ann, you don't have you've been seconded. Do we have any other motions for a vice chair?
I am happy if anyone else wants to step into this role. I can see you all clamoring for it.
I'd be happy to take on that role if you'll take on it.
No, nope.
I tried.
Only a few weeks left. 2 more
I
months.
know. I accept with the caveat that my job has gotten remarkably more busy, which is why I have to pass off note taking sometimes. But yes, I'm happy to accept.
Okay, and along those lines, we're going to take we've got a motion for Ann Santos to be the vice chair, and it's been seconded. And we'll take the votes first, starting in the room. Eric.
Yes.
Yes. Joe.
Yes.
Joe's affirmative. Kevin. Online, Catherine.
Yes.
I'm voting in the affirmative as well, and you get the last vote on that one.
As I accepted, I will vote yes.
Okay, so you get a unanimous vote for vice chair. Congratulations. And I'm sorry. You've been doing a fantastic job being able to help and collaborate as needed. So with that, we've accomplished the reorganization as required. We've got our upcoming dates. Before the next meeting, there were only two things before the June 2nd that were on the, it popped up on the time and date calendar, which was Memorial Day and Ascension Day, which are coming up. So Memorial Day is happening on Monday. There's also the rededication of the monument happening. I believe that's on the 31st. And downtown, highly recommend that people attend that, of the hikers. That's actually the World War I monument that was restored, which is an amazing piece of both artwork and just in terms of monument, to look at it and to realize that something over 100 years ago, the people of this town were involved in a great war is still needed, because we have a lot going on. So with that, anything else before we close out? Yes, Eric.
We have been invited to the retirement party of the town administrator. We had an email about that.
So the email for the party for those who responded, I went ahead and gave that information over to Sherry Dalton. Anyone else and if you want to confirm, you can send Sherry a note for that. This is for the acknowledgement and appreciation event for Town Administrator Mayo. Highly recommend people attend if they're able to.
This is everybody. This is not special to this committee.
It is for all
Okay.
committees and people who've been involved in the town.
Okay.
I anticipate that it will be a rather large bash of people that some that we know, some that we don't know, but given the participation in this town, it's likely to be a large bash. And I've been involved in our governance since before Steve took on his current role. And there are a lot of people that help make this town run. We're a town, we're not a city. We're also a really flat town. The six of us who have remained on this committee are just six of literally hundreds of people who've been involved over the years to do things, which is really quite remarkable. And highly encourage, if you have the ability to go, to definitely attend. Should be a good time. So thanks for bringing that up. And for people who are involved in multiple committees, as most of us are, you'll typically only have been asked by one committee or chair. That's in talking with Sherry, she said that people who are in multiple committees, she did see me to send it out to everyone multiple times, because some people are involved in multiple ways, as many of us who are involved here are also involved. Anything else? Okay, with that, do we have a vote to adjourn?
So moved.
Okay, Joe gets it. Is that a second, Ann?
Second, yes, please.
Okay, Ann gets a second on that one. Joe gets to move it. So with that, we will have one final vote for this evening. And we will start with online vote to adjourn. Ann?
Yes.
Catherine?
Yes.
Eric?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
And I'm an affirmative, unanimous. The meeting is adjourned at 8:47. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining and for participating. We will see everyone on June 16th. As I hear back from the other committees as to dates and so forth, I will let everyone know. And if it looks like we even might have a quorum, I'll make sure to post a public meeting just so that there's no questions about compliance and so forth. Thank you, Joe, for taking notes. Much appreciated.
Let's see how
And when you get them feel free, post them and so forth, and
Yeah.
we'll go from there.
Right, Mark.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.